Hello and welcome back to Something Z, and welcome to If Deku Had Venom Part 2. Last time on the What If, Venom crash landed on Earth, and shortly afterwards he was taken by some scientists, and about a month later he was able to escape, and it bonded with Izuku, allowing Izuku to use his power. And using his power, Izuku was able to pass the entrance exams, the quirk apprehension test, and just now Izuku and Ochako beat Bakugo and Ida in the Heroes vs. Villain training. Okay, so now that's out of the way, let's jump into the video in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so it begins what if hours after the last part ended, so the school day was just about to end. But right before it ended, Izuku noticed that Bakugo was leaving early, and Izuku wanted to talk to him because he was been acting weird ever since the exercise. And by the time Izuku was able to catch up to Bakugo, the two were outside just in front of the gate. And when Izuku got to Bakugo, Izuku asked why was Bakugo in a worse mood than normal, and Bakugo in response told him to shut up, and he asked him why did he not tell him, and why has he been holding back on him for so long. And it was obvious to Izuku that Bakugo's pride has been damaged, so he told Bakugo that he hasn't been holding back, but that just recently something had happened to him, which gave him someone that believes in him, that he can become a good hero. But after Izuku told him this, Bakugo told him that he was lying, because not just faith would give someone a quirk, especially one that was so strong. And hearing this, Izuku wanted to say something, but before he was able to say anything about Venom, Izuku's mouth closed on its own, and in his mind Venom told him to shut up, and that if he told him it could send them both to a lab to get experimented on. And after a couple more tries, Izuku finally gives up on trying to say anything about Venom, and after seeing Izuku try to open his mouth, Bakugo just scoffs, and he tells that he will win next time, and that he will not let him get stronger than him. Then right after he said that, he walked away. Okay, so now we skip to the next day, and when the school day began, Aizawa announced that they will have to decide who will be the two refs for the class. And when he announced this, just about everyone in Class 1A shouted saying that they should be chosen, while raising their hands. And after a couple seconds, Ida shot out of his seat, and he suggested that they should do a vote in order to decide who should be chosen to be the reps, which everyone agreed to. And after a couple minutes, the voting was done, and Izuku and Momo were standing at the front of the classroom, with Izuku getting the role of class rep, and Momo getting the role of vice rep. And shortly after that was decided, it was time for lunch, with Izuku, Ochako, and Ida eating together. And while they were eating, Ochako asked Ida about his family, and it's then that the two learn about Ida's family, and how he comes from a family of heroes, with his older brother being the pro hero Ingenium. But before they could get more in depth about Ida's family, alarms throughout the entire school began to go off, and hearing this, all the upperclassmen jumped out of their seats and ran to the exit. And confused about what was going on, the three tried to get an upperclassman's attention, and after a couple attempts, they were finally able to get the attention of a junior, who told them that the security alarms must have gone off, meaning that at least someone has broken into the school, and that they should hurry to the panic rooms in case they are villains. And hearing this, the three ran to the exit, but right after it was too late, they noticed that the only hallway was full of people, who were now pushing and shoving to try to get into the hallway, so they got shoved right into the crowd. And after a minute, Ida got pushed against a glass wall that was facing towards the front of the school, and when Ida looked outside, he saw that there was a giant group of reporters at the front doors harassing Aizawa and President Mike. And seeing this, Ida was able to piece together that there weren't any villains here, and that it was just a false alarm. So Ida began to look around for Izuku, which he was able to see, but no matter how much Ida tried to yell, his voice would get covered and muffled out by a huge wall of people in between the two of them. So Ida decided to take matters into his own hands. So he told Ochako, who was right next to him, to make him float. And when she did, Ida used his engine to make him fly to an exit sign that was just above the exit door. And when he landed, Ida shouted for everyone's attention. And seeing Ida, most of the people quieted down. And when he was ready, Ida shouted that there weren't any villains attacking, and instead there was just a group of reporters outside. And hearing this, people began to look outside, and when they did, everyone began to calm down. And with that, the group of students were able to make it back to their classrooms without any difficulties. And when everyone in Class 1A made it back, Izuku had an announcement to make. So he went to the front of the class, and he announced that he was giving his role of class rep to Ida, because he showed just a couple minutes ago that he had the choice to be the true class rep, and that he was more deserving of it than him. And when Izuku was done talking, Izuku asked if Ida would accept. And after a couple seconds, Ida nodded his head in agreement. So now we skip a couple days, and when class began, Aizawa announced that they will be going on a field trip, and he tells them to get onto the school bus that is waiting for them outside once they get dressed in their hero costumes. So now Izuku is now covered in venom. And after a couple minutes, the bus stopped, and when class 1A got off, they found themselves at the USJ, and waiting for them was the pro hero Sartine, who welcomes them to the USJ. And she began to give a speech while walking them into the building about how they are skilled and have powerful quirks that can be used to save many lives. But then she tells them that the opposite is also true, and that if they are not careful, many people can die. Then when Sartine was done with that, she closed the doors to the USJ. But the second that the doors were closed, the lights in the USJ began to flicker on and off. And after around a minute of this, a giant portal opened up at the plaza of the USJ. And after a couple of seconds, a guy with a hand mask, a giant bird monster, and a guy covered by the same energy that made the portal came walking out. Then when the three were a couple feet away from the portal, villains after villain began to walk out of the portal, making it so that the plaza was covered in villains. And once the last villain made it through the portal closed behind them. And once Aizawa saw that the villains were done appearing, he told 13 to get the students out of there, while he held the villains back. And once he said that, Aizawa put on his glasses and jumped down a flight of stairs towards the villains. And seeing this, 13 shouted for everyone to run to the front doors. But the second the portal villain saw the group of students run, he flew towards them, while stretching out his body mass. And right before the students were able to get to the door, the portal villain completely surrounded the class, blocking the way out. And when the villain blocked the exit, he began to turn his head, and eventually he blurted out that he wasn't here. Then before the portal villain said anything else, Kirishima, Bakugo, and Izuku ran at the villain's face, and they tried to attack, with Bakugo and Kirishima going for a punch while using their quirks, and Izuku firing a web. But all their attacks didn't seem to do anything, and they all just seemed to pass straight through. Then in retort, the portal villain began to engulf the class with his energy, and he began to teleport some of them. And after a couple of seconds, Izuku went from dry to completely wet, and when Izuku was able to open his eyes, he and Venom found themselves deep underwater. But before they were able to figure out where they were, a villain with a shark-like quirk began to swim around the two of them, and in retort, Izuku shot out a web aimed at the villain's face, which did work, but it wasn't as strong or sticky as the webbing should have been. So when Izuku tried to swing the villain, the webbing came off, and the villain only got flung a couple feet. And when the villain recovered, it swam towards Izuku again. But before the villain was able to take a bite out of Izuku, Sue appeared and she jumped on the villain's head, making them get flung a couple feet down. Making them get flung a couple feet down. Then she shot out her tongue at Izuku and she wrapped it around him. Then she dragged Izuku onto a nearby boat. And when she got them onto the boat, Sue jumped back into the water to see if there was any more other classmates in the area. But after a couple minutes of swimming, she wasn't able to find anyone else. Then she went back to the boat. But this time she was spotted getting onto the ship. And when she was seen, many villains began to surround the boat. And seeing this, Sue and Izuku began to tell each other about their quirk in order to find a way out of the situation. And after around a minute of talking, a villain began to manipulate water around the boat into a giant hand. And he was about to hit the boat into many small pieces. But right before the ship was hit, Izuku jumped onto Sue's back. And when he was secured, she jumped into the air as high as she could. Then when they got maximum height, Izuku shot out two webs aimed straight up, which connected to the very top of the USJ. And the villains didn't see this because when the hand crashed into the ship, water launched into the air, hiding the two. And by the time the water calmed down, the two were already at the ceiling of the USJ. And because the villains didn't find them, they assumed that they were somewhere in the rubble, possibly injured or dead. So they began to swim around looking for the bodies. And when Izuku and Sue were sure that they were hidden, Izuku and Sue climbed and ran on the ceiling until they got to the plaza. And when they got over to the plaza, Izuku saw the bird monster standing over Aizawa with his face to the ground. And a couple feet away, the hand villain was watching. Then the two turned their heads towards the entrance of the USJ. And when they did, they saw that the portal villain was still fighting and holding back their classmates. So Izuku told Sue to help the class while he helps Aizawa. And when she nodded, she crawled towards the entrance. Then Izuku aimed a hand towards the roof and he shot a web from one of his hands. Then when it was connected, Izuku jumped off the ceiling and he began to fall somewhat slowly, using his web to slow his fall just enough so that he didn't go into a speed that would have caused him to die immediately on impact with the ground. Then when Izuku was around 20 feet off the ground, the hand villain commanded the bird monster that he called Nomu to pick up Aizawa and finish the job. And hearing this, the monster began to raise Aizawa, and it began to pull his arm back. And seeing this, Izuku detached himself from the web he was using, and he shot out webbing that landed on both sides of the Nomu. Then when they connected to the ground, Izuku retracted the webbing, making Izuku fly feet first into the Nomu. And Izuku kicked the creature in the neck as hard as he could, but when Izuku made impact, the monster hardly shook, or even flinch. But the attack did stop Nomu from finishing the punch. And when Izuku landed, the Nomu turned his attention onto Izuku, and so did the hand villain, who began to laugh. And he said, well, I guess one of your students are about to die alongside you trying to pretend to be a hero. And when Shigaraki said that, he shouted for Nomu to get Izuku. And seeing this, in the blink of an eye, the creature appeared in front of Izuku, and it went in for a punch. But luckily, with the help of Venom, Izuku was able to dodge just in time, so Izuku was able to avoid the hit. Then the Nomu went for another punch, which hit Izuku head on in the gut, which when Izuku made contact, Izuku got flung a couple feet away. And thanks to Venom, Izuku was still able to fight, but he was injured. So Izuku then jumped right back to his feet and he ran straight at Nomu, with him shooting out his webbing at Nomu's feet to hopefully slow down the creature. But that didn't work as much as Izuku wanted it to. And Izuku, now completely ready to fight the creature, began to fight, with him only just dodging, with him being hit a couple more times after a couple minutes. But eventually Nomu was able to hit Izuku again, but this time, unlike the other times, it was straight in the head. And when he made contact, Izuku was launched again, and he was knocked unconscious when his head hit the ground. Then Shigaraki began to laugh, and he told Nomu to pick him up by his head. And the Nomu, hearing this, began to walk towards Izuku. But when he made an effort to pick up Izuku jumped out of the way. And when he landed, his mask began to change, with a giant mouth filled with fangs beginning to appear. Then Izuku's fingers became more like claws, with the end of his fingers becoming longer, pointier, and finally denser. And when it was done, Venom began to run towards the Nomu, and the two began to fight. And shortly after the two began to fight, the portal villain flew to Shigaraki, and he told him that one of the students were able to escape, and he believes that he's getting reinforcements. And with this, Shigaraki got mad and he began to shout and thrash around. Then after a couple seconds, he stopped thrashing, and he decided that if everything was going wrong, he would at least kill Izuku. So while Venom was distracted, Shigaraki ran towards the fight, and he tried to use his quirk Decay on Izuku to try to disintegrate him. But right before he made contact, Venom moved his head out of the way, making Shigaraki hit Nomu's leg instead, making it get destroyed. And when Shigaraki tried to pull his arm back, Venom grabbed his hand and he pushed it even farther into Nomu's leg, making it even get more injured. And no matter how hard Shigaraki tried, he wasn't able to get out of Izuku's grip. So he tried to fight Izuku using his remaining hand and quirk. But every time Shigaraki tried to hit Venom, Venom would just dodge and it would hit Nomu instead. But eventually, after around 30 seconds, Shigaraki told Nomu to punch Izuku hard, without worrying about him. So Nomu punched in between the two, making the two get flung in different directions. But before Shigaraki hit the ground, Kurogiri made a portal behind Shigaraki, and next to him. So Shigaraki was flung back to where he was originally standing. Then when Shigaraki landed, he was able to get back to his feet, and he shouted for Nomu to kill Izuku. But before Nomu was able to do anything else, the doors of the USJ burst open. And when the doors fell down, the people in the plaza that were still awake turned their heads. And when they did, they saw All Might standing in the doorway. But before anyone could react, All Might ran all the way to the plaza, and they grabbed Aizawa and Izuku, and he put them into the forest a couple feet away. And he told Izuku to get Aizawa and get him to safety. And All Might was going to ask what happened to Izuku, because he looks different from normal. But because they were in a dangerous scenario, All Might decided to ask later. So he then ran back to the plaza to fight the villains. So Venom then grabbed Aizawa and he began to run towards the entrance. But midway, Izuku finally woke up. And when he did, he asked Venom what had happened since he passed out. And when he got the complete rundown, Izuku told Venom that he needed to go back to help. And after a groan from Venom, Venom gave back control to Izuku, making Izuku go back to normal, with his mouth getting completely covered by the Venom symbiote. Then Izuku grabbed Aizawa by the collar, and he began to swing towards the entrance by one arm. And when he got there, Izuku dropped off Aizawa, and he jumped back to the plaza using his webs to make him get there faster. And when he got there, All Might and Nomu were still clashing, with them both just punching each other. And after around a minute, All Might began to launch Nomu into the air. Then after one punch using the rest of All Might's energy, he flung Nomu straight through the roof of the USJ. And seeing this, Shigaraki began to yell in frustration. But after a couple seconds, Kurogiri pointed out that All Might was weakened, and that now would be a good time to finish him off. And hearing this, Shigaraki nodded, and he began to run towards All Might. But right before he was able to get to him, Shigaraki got shot multiple times in non-lethal areas. And feeling this, Shigaraki told Kurogiri to make a portal, which he did. But right before Shigaraki disappeared, he shouted that this wasn't over, and that the League of Villains would come back stronger. Then he began to look around, and when he did, he pointed at him, and he told him that he will find out what was up with him, and he will make sure Izuku will regret becoming such a nuisance. Then before Izuku could say anything else, the portal closed, making it so Shigaraki and the portal villain were gone. So now it's been hours since the attack, and everyone is back at the campus. And because All Might and Izuku were the only ones truly injured, because Venom was the main thing allowing Izuku to even stand, they were taken to Recovery Girl's office, while Aizawa was taken to the hospital. And while Izuku was recovering, he talked to Venom about what happened to him while he was asleep, and he learned that Venom was able to take control of him if he really needed him to. And after a couple hours of resting, Izuku was released from the nurse's office, and when he was walking to the front gates, Izuku got stopped by All Might, who asked him what happened to him while he was fighting the League of Villains. And he then asked why did Izuku get singled out during Shigaraki's then speech. But because Venom was screaming in his mind telling Izuku not to tell, Izuku just shook his head, and he told him that he didn't know why the villain hated him so much, and he told All Might that he just lost control of his quirk for a bit. And after Izuku said this, Izuku quickly walked away, until he got to the front gates. And when he got to the front gates, he saw two people waiting for him, which were Ochako and Ida. And when he got to them, they began to walk home together. And this is really What If. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you next time on Something Z.